Hello there and welcome back to Build with the Boys. I get a lot of emails from you and I love them. I love all the emails that we get. But one of them that gets mentioned quite a lot, I mean, even the emails about something completely different, people ask me about kind of what would you like to build, and they also tell me what they'd like to build. And I've done on one of the catch-ups did before I did kind of my dream builds. And one of them that comes around all the time, and I get asked this a lot, is about Johnny Five. Now I've addressed this on the channel before. I addressed it months ago on the catch up about why haven't we seen a Johnny Five? And we always see a Johnny Five. But there's so much to go into about this that I thought, well, you know what? I'll tell you why I think you haven't seen one, why you might see one, and why you may never see one. So if we go back to 1986 when Short Circuit was made, Short Circuit was a moderate box office success. Kind of. I mean, when you actually look at it, Short Circuit was it about broke even. That's what it did. So I mean, typically for a film to make money, it needs to make twice its production budget plus 50%. That's where you need to be for this to have actually been a profitable endeavor. That's where you need to be. That sounds nuts, but it's completely true, because the cinemas that show it and also the distributors take about 50% of your profits. That's gone immediately. Then you've got to make back what you spent on it. Then you've got to make back your marketing budget as well, because typically when they tell you what the budget of the film was, they don't mention the marketing budget. So it'll say, oh, it cost 50 million to make. You can probably tack another 25 million on to marketing it and sending these people around the world promoting it and all of that jazz. A lot of stuff is made to promote a movie. There's just dead money. So things like posters and whatnot, which are just given away, and promo cards, and it's just dead money. It's purely to get butts on seats. That's what it's for. So the budget of Short Circuit was 15 million, and it made just over 40 million at the box office. So it wiped his face, is what it did. It about broke even, which wasn't enough. I mean, that's the reality of it, is it wasn't enough, because on a film that had a relatively high production budget for its time, 50 million sounds like pennies these days, but that's quite a lot for the day. They needed more from it. So even though we remember it fondly, it didn't exactly set the box office on fire. It did go to number one when it was released, but it was released before kind of the big summer hits, which shows that the film company didn't have that much faith in it. They didn't hold it back to be a big summer release. It was released in May. So it did okay. It did all right at the box office. It did well on home video as well. But did it? Because we'll come into that. So Short Circuit did all right. It did all right. Now, typically, and this is going to anger some people, but it's true. It's not my opinion. This is just the facts. Movies with a robot as a lead character don't do well at the box office. They just don't. They don't. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule, because there always are. So you can make an argument that Terminator did really well at the box office. Yeah. But you could also make an argument that the Terminator is not the lead character of the Terminator. The lead character of the Terminator is Sarah Connor. The Terminator just happens to be the enemy that's coming after her. When I say lead character, I typically mean the protagonist of a robot movie, the hero of a robot movie. Typically, these movies, historically, have not done well at the box office. And there's a whole list of these where you go, they did okay. It's like that. There again, I mean, you'll say Transformers. I'd argue that even though it has got robot as a main character, it's based on a franchise that already existed, so it already had a market there. I'm talking about original properties where a robot's the main character, historically have not done well. And I mean, I can just reel off some. Chappie, for instance, that was already, it just didn't do well at the box office. It didn't. Too Much. Anyone remember Too Much? No? Too Much came out around about the same time as Short Circuit. If you've never heard of Too Much, go Google Too Much Robot and you'll see what I'm talking about. Bicentennial Man. And remember that? There's the Robin Williams robot movie. Didn't do well at the box office. Real Steel. That's a more recent one with Hugh Jackman and the Fighting Robots. It did all right, but it didn't like set the world on fire. And historically, this is what happens. Now, of course, there's exceptions to these rules. RoboCop, for instance, did very well. But again, it was an action movie, featuring a robot. When you look at Family Fare, that typically just doesn't do well. And E.T. sparked the success of E.T. sparked sort of like the big budget family movie, which features an alien or a robot or a. And Short Circuit sort of fell into that mold. So Short Circuit was there very much for the kind of less capitalised on the E.T. And it's very E.T. and it's kind of, I mean, Johnny Five himself is very E.T. and it's kind of understanding of the world and the way he talks about things. And it did okay. It did all right at the box office. It finished the year out at number 20 in the box office. Now, just so you can get an idea of what that means, is the other movies in the top 30, so these are the movies that didn't make it into the top 20, were complete bombs, with the exception of 3. And the 3 that weren't total bombs were Pretty in Pink, because even though it just missed out the top 20 spot, Pretty in Pink, and it missed out by... Short Circuit took about 100 grand more than at the box office, which means if you re-released Pretty in Pink now, Short Circuit would leave the box office. If you released any of the films from 21 to 30 in the box office, Short Circuit would drop out the top 20. It just would, because it barely made it there. So ones that did worse than Short Circuit, Pretty in Pink technically took less money, but it cost 6 million less to make. So even though it took 100 grand less than Short Circuit, financially, it was actually a success. So it didn't just break even, it was profitable. So as profitable movies go, it was a lot more profitable than Short Circuit. The Fly is at 22. So The Fly had exactly the same budget as Short Circuit. So again, it about broke even. That's what it did. And there are others in there, but About Last Night is in the top 30. Again, it cost 6 million. It took 38 million. So it was profitable. And the other one that's in the top 30 is, I think, is at 27, but was one of the most profitable films of 1986. Is a movie called Running Scared, which was like a buddy cop movie with Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines, and it cost $1 million to make. But it took about 36 million at the box office. So it took 36 times its budget. So even though it's low down in the rank of what it actually took, what it actually made, puts it pretty much number one. It was pretty much the most profitable film of 1986. But again, if you're dumping that much money into a movie, you want it to do better than ended at 20 in the box office. You just do. So it took its hit. Now, it was enough for them to go, well, let's make a sequel, which is a bizarre move because typically sequels cost more money and take less money at the box office. Again, there are exceptions to this rule. The Fast and Furious movies are a beautiful example of the sequels make a lot more money than the original, but historically, the sequel does not make as much as the original, but costs more money to make. So you really need your original to have been incredibly profitable for your sequel to do well. Short Circuit wasn't, but it was a big hit on home rental. By all accounts, and this is sketchy because they never really kept correct records, because we need to look at all the independents out there. Independents were phoned in and going, hey, we've got this many rentals. It didn't, But by all accounts, it suggested that the most rented movie of 1986 was Short Circuit. Now, that doesn't mean people liked it. It just means people rented it. Which suggests to me that people that looked at the trailers in the cinema and were like, I don't know, I don't fancy it. Wait for it to come out on video, rented it. Doesn't mean they enjoyed it. Yeah, and that was proven by Short Circuit 2 in 1988. So 2 years later, Short Circuit 2 has been made, and it's been made off the strength of people have rented the hell out of Short Circuit, and it did moderate at the box office. A sequel could be lucrative. So they made the sequel. And the sequel cost 26 million to make, so 11 million more than the original 15 million budget 2 years later, and was an absolute bomb. I mean, it did nothing. It debuted at number 7 in the box office. Now, I can tell you, for a big studio film, if you don't debut in the top 3, you bombed. You're done. Again, there have been exceptions to this rule. A good example of this is The Greatest Showman. The Greatest Showman is kind of a freak when it comes to box office because it debuted at, I think, number 9 because critics savaged it. There was a lot of competition at the time. The critics hated The Greatest Showman, but the audiences didn't. So word of mouth, The Greatest Showman started moving up the chart, and its box office expanded, which is kind of unheard of, but it happens. That isn't what happened with Short Circuit 2. Short Circuit 2 went in at number 7 in its debut, and it dropped out the following week. It wasn't even in the top 10 the following week. That's how bad it did at the box office. It did terrible. So it's cost them 11 million more to make, and it had a total box office gross of 15 million. So they've lost $11 million on this movie. Before you even factor in marketing or anything else, they immediately lost $11 million on Short Circuit 2. The critics hated it. The audiences hated it. It's not a good movie. Short Circuit 2 is... I'm sure I know there are people that would die on this hill defending the Short Circuit movies. Short Circuit 2 is not a good movie. Short Circuit, the original, is all right. You might remember it fondly, but what you probably remember him fondly is Johnny Five. If you actually look at the stories of Short Circuit, there's not a lot there. There really isn't. And then we go into the other issue. So, I mean, this is the financials. This is why, if you were a buyer for a partwork company and you were looking for a property that would do well, that would have mainstream appeal, that would have mass appeal, if you looked at the box office numbers of Short Circuit, you wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. Because you just, all you could see is, people don't like this. They invested money in it, no one bought it, no one likes this. That's what you're going to see. That is what the numbers are going to tell you. Now, naturally, you can do other research into it. You could ask partwork builders, would you be interested in this? And you might get an overwhelming, yes, I'd like to build one. But if you're just looking at the numbers, no. You'd be like, no, there is no way we'd touch this. Unless there's another factor, which we'll come to at the end. So that's part of the problem. It just, financially, the numbers don't add up. It doesn't look good. So like, it's not going to work for us. It wasn't, and again, it wasn't the biggest bomb of 1986, not by a long shot. I mean, a good example of this is a film that people remember rather fondly, is The Three Amigos. Believe it or not, The Three Amigos production budget was a lot more than Short Circuit. $25 million was the budget for Three Amigos. It barely made it into the top 30. I think it's 26 of 1986. It bombed at the box office badly. It's remembered now and people remember it kind of fondly, but it wasn't well received. And The Three Amigos brings us on to something else, which is the problem with Short Circuit. A major problem with Short Circuit is the casting of Fisher Stevens as the character Ben, who is the designer of Johnny Five, and he's Indian. Fisher Stevens is not Indian. Fisher Stevens is an American. Now, that in itself caused controversy, particularly in this day and age. Back then, this was acceptable, and again, I'll go into how acceptable it was. But now it creates a problem. If you've seen a partwork magazine that comes with any of the models, they go into the background of the film, and Ben is a very prominent character in the first one and a very prominent character in the second one. So if you're going to mention that in your magazines, what you've essentially got to do is publish photos in your magazines of a Caucasian actor in blackface playing a stereotype of an Indian. That's just not going to fly. So that gives you a whole new problem. For those who don't remember, here are two pictures. This is a picture of Fisher Stevens as Fisher Stevens, and here's a picture of Fisher Stevens as Ben. Now, the character of Ben in Short Circuit is a nice character. He's not purely there to be made fun of, but it seems wildly unnecessary to either, one, cast a Caucasian actor as an Indian actor, when you could have just cast an Indian actor, or two, whether or not the character needs to be Indian at all, because Fisher Stevens himself picked up a lot of crap much later on for playing that part in those movies. Now, you'd say, well, why would you take that role? He didn't. The original character of Ben was just an American. He was just supposed to be like a computer nerd. So he auditioned for it as himself, and he was cast as, this is what the character is. It wasn't until literally 2 weeks before filming, they decided they were going to make the character Indian. And the reason why is because this was made in 1985. And Beverly Hills Cop had just done very well at the box office. And there's a scene in Beverly Hills Cop that's only about 4 minutes long, but it's one of the most remembered scenes. And it's the scene where Axel Foley is in the art gallery with Serge, who is the French proprietor of the art gallery. And that scene was people loved that scene. They made a really big deal about it. So there was this whole thing of the accent and they lapped that up and they're like, oh, could we do that with Short Circuit? So the decision was made. Ben is now Indian, which is why he's called Ben, which isn't typically an Indian name. They just didn't change the name. But then all of a sudden, Fisher Stevens is told, okay, you're now playing an Indian. He said, but I'm not an Indian. Well, you are now. And I understand. As a young actor that's just been cast in what's going to be a big Hollywood movie, what's he going to do? Quit? So I understand why he did what he did. And also because sensibilities at the time were very different. So you've now got Fisher Stevens playing an Indian. That creates all kinds of problems when it comes to marketing the Johnny Five model, because you just can't do it. It's just not acceptable. It should never have been acceptable. But it was, because if you look at the other movies that were around in 1986 and 1987 as well, that round out kind of your top 50s of the year, there are a bunch of these movies where you're like, that's not aged well, has it? So examples of this are the same year the movie Soul Man was released, which featured C. Thomas Howell, find a loophole to get into university because it had a diversity quota where African Americans could get a full scholarship to university. So he takes tannin pills to darken his skin. And it is the worst. The worst. It wasn't good at the time. I can remember watching it at the time. I was really young and thinking, this seems all kinds of wrong. Because it's all stereotypes as well. I mean, it's not bad enough that it's doing this. It's just stereotypes. Like, there's a scene where, oh, he can't play basketball because there's the stereotype that every black man's great at basketball. And I'm like, this is quite insulting. And it ends with this kind of moral thing where he sort of realizes, you know, he experiences racism, and it's supposed to be this moral lesson. It's like, are you kidding me? You cannot do what you've just done and then make out this is a moral message, because it is not. So that was, it was out of the movies. It didn't do well, but it was out of the movies. Other movies that were at the time, 16 Candles, where there is, I believe, a Japanese character in it called I'm not even going to say it on here because I might get censored for it. He's got a name which is basically sounds like long penis, and he's just like this horrible stereotype. Revenge of the Nerds did it as well, where they had stereotypes of gay men and Asian men, and it was quite common. Gung Ho was another movie that was released at this time, which was about Japanese culture and American culture clashing in a. It was quite common, and there was a lot of kind of laugh at Johnny Foreigner, and it just not okay. But it was at the time. Should never have been, but it was at the time. And this creates your problem with Short Circuit, because how do you market that without anyone go, you're just printing loads of pictures of a guy in blackface? It's a problem. So you've got all of these things lining up against Short Circuit at this point. The other thing you've got is the company that owned Short Circuit had no faith in it at all and sold it. So it was gone. It's moved around a lot of companies, and a lot of companies over the years have attempted to remake it. So it ended up at Dimension Studios in 2008. And they were full steam ahead. They went into pre-production and they were going to go for it. And it was going to be about, I mean, you can read the synopsis of it. It was going to be a child from a broken family befriends Johnny Five. That was the synopsis. You're like, okay, I can see that. Never happened. It went through development hell for like 7 years. And they were like, you know what, there's nothing in this. Kill it. So it got killed. It has since ended up at Spyglass Productions. And Spyglass are still saying they're going to do it. So Spyglass at the moment are still saying they are remaking Short Circuit. But what they've said, and this is very bizarre, is they're going to put a Latino twist on Short Circuit. I have no idea what that means, but that is their exact phrase. That's not my phrasing, that's their phrasing. We are going to put a Latino twist on Short Circuit. Take from that what you will, but I mean, again, we've heard this multiple times where a sequel or remake was going to happen and didn't happen. Now, you might think, well, I want a Short Circuit 3. There kind of is one. This might surprise you as well. You might not know this, but Short Circuit 2 was not the end of Johnny 5. Johnny 5 is in a sequel to Short Circuit 2 in 1991's Hot Cars, Cold Facts. I'm not joking. You're probably thinking, oh, what the bloody hell's that? There's a movie. It's a short, I mean, it's about 40 minutes long, and it's called Hot Cars, Cold Facts. And it stars Johnny 5. So you see Johnny 5 again. They wheeled him out in 1991. And I will put a link to it. You can watch it online. I'll put a link to that, and you can see. So if you're desperate for another fix of Johnny 5, you can get it with Hot Cars and Cold Facts. It ain't great, but you can definitely see it. A lot of things went against Short Circuit with the production company. The most bizarre thing was there was like no merchandise released for Short Circuit, which I find nuts for what is essentially a robot, and I think kids would have lapped that up. If you'd have released little Johnny 5s, you'd have sold 1 billion of them. But they didn't. They didn't. Now, people say, I remember having one. You don't. If you had one, you had some knockoff. There was never an official Short Circuit toy of Johnny 5. This is the merchandise that was available at the time. So there was a Panini sticker album. I had that. I remember having that and collecting it. There was this rather bizarre fan. It's weird, right? It kind of looks like Johnny 5, but it's a fan. There were some sunglasses. Yeah, because, sunglasses. There was a Commodore 64 game, which was this one. And that was it. That was pretty much it. There was some books. There was a novelization of the movie. There was some postcard sets. And there were a couple of T-shirts that kicked around, but that was it. There was nothing else. Why wouldn't you do a deal with a toy company to make a Johnny 5 toy? It's bizarre, but they didn't. It didn't happen. And then what makes this really bizarre is the whole sort of plot device of Short Circuit 2 is little remote control Johnny 5s. Right? So Short Circuit 2 revolves around them making little Johnny 5s, little remote control Johnny 5 toys. That's it. Why wouldn't you market that? If your movie revolves around every kid would want a little remote control Johnny 5, why wouldn't you make a little remote control Johnny 5? They didn't. Now, you will see these things around, right? And then if you see them, they're one of two things. They're either a very, 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 very expensive prop from the movie, or they're unlicensed replicas. So there is no licensed Short Circuit merchandise. You won't find it. You can go looking for it. You won't find it. If you go onto Amazon right now and just type in Johnny 5, you won't get a single Short Circuit thing come up. If you type in Short Circuit Johnny 5, you'll get the typical Redbubble stuff where it's like, here's a mug with Johnny 5 on it. It's like, yeah, it's not licensed. Someone's just slapped a picture of Johnny 5 on a mug and they're selling it. That's typically what you find. So if you want a Johnny 5 model, there are plenty of vendors out there that make an unlicensed version of Johnny 5, which you could buy and build your own. But here, this is all the reasons why it's unlikely you're going to see one. Because again, at the moment, the rights are with Spyglass Entertainment. Would they want the original Johnny 5 going out there if they're planning on redoing it? Because I can assure you, whatever Johnny 5 looks like in any new film they make ain't going to be what he looks like now. So Johnny 5 is a very 80s robot. I mean, that's what he is. And there's that to take into account as well. When it comes to robots these days, technology's advanced so much. Johnny 5 was futuristic for what we thought futuristic. Now you look at it and go, I reckon I could make one of those in my garage. Because it's not that tech advanced, is it? Let's face it. It's a nice looking robot, but it just looks like, yeah, I don't think it would be that difficult to make one. I couldn't. I'm talking about people with the skill to do it. I'm sure could knock up a full-size Johnny 5 without that much effort. It naturally wouldn't have all the facial movements and things, but you know what I'm saying. So these are all the things that go against seeing a Johnny 5. The market just isn't there for it. Now, I know we're like, I'd want one. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but, 500 of us isn't enough. It's just not. It's just not. You'd need this to have mass appeal, and maybe it would. But unless someone does marketing to that effect, would you build one? You're not going to see one. You're just not. Because the other thing you've got to take into account is it's a gamble. So let's say Fan Home, for instance, decided they were going to run a Johnny 5. Okay, we got Johnny 5. That's what we're launching in January. And then Hachette go, Avia, we're launching Build Your Own BB-8. And in times where money's tight and not everybody does multiple partworks and you commit to one for 2 years, you might look at it and go, oh, I'd rather have one from the much more successful, much more popular franchise than that sort of remnant from a cult 80s movie. And that's the other thing is where these companies are going to take into account. They're not just going to go, yeah, no, we'll roll the dice on it. They're going to look for what is going to have mass appeal because they're businesses. They're businesses. We are passionate about our pop culture and our hobbies and our craft. They ultimately share some of that passion, but they have to make money. It has to be profitable. It just does. That's how the world works. So do I think you're ever going to see one? Well, I never say never. Never say never, because, I mean, again, you might one day see one. I can't say never. But I would say in a world where there are massive franchises that we've never seen a partwork of, I think a Johnny 5 is clutching at straws. Now, I hope this comes back to bite me one day. And so, see, good, I hope it does, because it means you'll get your Johnny 5s. But I've got to look at it kind of with my business head and go, this is why you haven't seen one. But reasons why I think you might see one is because it was financially terrible for all parties involved. To acquire the license would be relatively cheap. Because, you know, you can't say to somebody, okay, we want X amount of million for this, because it's like, based on what? It's like, this is a gamble on our side. It's, you know, you're not buying Jurassic Park here. You're not buying the Avengers. You're buying the rights to the 20th ranked movie of 1986 that had the 85th ranked movie of 1988. You know? But I think what would need to happen before you saw that is someone else would need to roll the dice. Now, you'll notice no one else is rolling that dice. NECA and Sideshow Collectibles. Where's their version of Johnny 5? There ain't one. Because, again, they've looked at it and gone, no. No one is rolling the dice on Johnny 5. Nobody. That's why you don't see Johnny 5 merch. Because people just don't think there's money in it. Maybe, if one of these companies does, and all of a sudden, like, Jesus, Johnny 5 merch is selling, like, you might see a partwork. But I think the market needs to shift before you see that. I'm not dumping on Short Circuit. I'm not. I liked it when I was a kid. I watched it recently and I'm like, ooh. Because again, I mean, even if we ignore the character of Ben, which you can't, but even if we did, I mean, another thing you have to take into account is how they prove Johnny 5 is alive. And this, again, is something that people forget about. The way they prove Johnny 5 is alive is by telling him what can only be described as an anti-Semitic joke that he laughs at. It's a joke about a Jewish stereotype that he cracks up laughing about, and that's how they prove he's alive. And I'm like, oh, and there's, yeah, again, it doesn't age well. It just does not. So, yeah, there's your problem. There's your problems. It's a case of good robot, bad movie. You know, and we get that a lot. I mean, I've mentioned it before. I'd like to build the Nautilus car from The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Terrible movie, amazing car, and you get a lot of that. You get in horror movies, you get bad movie, great werewolf, or you'll get, you know, bad movie, great spaceship, and that's what happens. That's what happens. So yeah, these are all the reasons why I don't think you're going to see Johnny 5. Now, again, I'm very positive, and I like to come across as that. So I don't want you to think I'm dashing your dreams of getting one. I'm just telling you why I think you might not see one. But that doesn't mean you can't get one. It just means you can't get one through the regular channels. There are plenty of Johnny 5 models out there. So if you want to build one, you definitely can. But if you're holding out for Hachette or Agora or Fan Home or D'Agostini to deliver you a Johnny 5, probably not. Probably not. That's just the reality of it. But if you want one, you can get one. You can definitely go get one. If you Google it right now, Johnny 5 model, you'll find one. What I will do is, as I said, I'll put a link in the description where you can go and watch what is essentially Short Circuit 3. Hot cars, cold facts, which it's terrible. Terrible. And yeah, but if you need a Johnny 5 fix, that's where you'll get one. But as a positive, we got to go out on a positive. Never say never. Never say never. And one day, I hope a comment appears on here 3 years from now, 4 years from now, go, we did get a Johnny 5. Good. I hope we do. I genuinely hope we do, because I'd probably build it. I'd probably build it along with you. But to be honest with you, I think you got more chance of seeing Wally. Before you see Johnny 5, you got more chance of seeing Wally. And look at it that way. Look at other robots in other movies that did a lot better than Short Circuit that you haven't seen yet. Why would they pick Johnny 5? And that's come around with it. Wally, you've never seen a Wally. Part build Wally? I'd be all over that. I'd definitely do that. But that's where we are with it. I mean, you might see a BB-8. You might see, I'd like to see a half-scale C-3PO, like the big figure they've done of Batman. Wouldn't that be nice? A half-scale C-3PO to go with your half-scale R2-D2? Be awesome. So who knows? But that's it from me. Just a bit of a retrospect at Short Circuit. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you think there's a reason why we'd see one or a reason why we'd never see one, or let people know where the best place to get one from is in the comments, because I'm sure they'll read through and they'll be able to see it for themselves. If you haven't yet, please remember to like and subscribe. That's all from me. In a world where you be anything at all, just be nice, and I will see you on the next one.